So by now, I'm sure you've heard the story of Fucksmith, but if you haven't heard about Fucksmith, here's how the story goes. 11 years ago, a user goes on to Reddit and asks a simple question. How do I make my cheese more sticky on my pizza so that way it doesn't slide off? Fucksmith hops on the thread and helpfully answers in the most Reddit of ways. Well, the easiest way to do that is to put non-toxic glue inside your cheese, or maybe it was inside of the sauce, I think is what it was. The point is that pretty recently, Google made a deal with Reddit to index the depths of Reddit and use the content that was posted on that platform to help inform their AI, and guess what? Help augment their search results. Now, there's a whole host of things that are involved in this, including the fact that so many people go to Google and they add the word Reddit at the end because they go and they figure out, guess what? Reddit has useful information for me, more so than the rest of the web, because the rest of the web is filled with scams and people who are interested in giving me garbage content that's effectively AI generated or very low effort at the very least, that's bubbling up to the top of search results on a Google homepage or on the Google search results page. And so what you do is you append Reddit to the end of that and you go to the place where the humans are answering. So they pay $60 million, right? And Reddit and Google have this deal. Pretty recently, Google added AI overviews to their search, right? Those AI overviews are summarizing the search results on that page and reading through those web pages on their own and putting it in a helpful summary at the top. Here's the problem. One of many, by the way. Google and AI and LLMs cannot reason. They don't have the capacity to necessarily deeply understand what information is reliable and which information is not. There's a separate system that is managing that. And guess what? If Fucksmith comments 11 years ago that the best way to make stickier pizza and get the cheese to stick to the pizza is to add glue to your pizza sauce, well, the best thing Google can do is summarize the information it's got. This is indicative of a bigger problem. And so today I want to ask, why do all of these AI products that have come out suck so much?
Look, the simple truth is this. The pin is not worth the money.
Unfortunately, it's also the new worst product I think I've ever reviewed.
Not yet, and probably not anytime soon. You definitely should not buy it planning to replace your phone.
So yeah, this thing is also bad at a lot of stuff. And this list is gonna sound pretty familiar.
I think AI gadgets might just be impossible. I've been testing this thing, the Rabbit R1, for about a week now, and I don't know how to draw any other conclusions about it than that.
So I think the purest example of these bad AI products is the one that I've talked about before, which is the Humane AI Pin. It's been widely panned, including by me, right? And that's because it sucked. It really did. I've never tried the product, but I don't need to. I've seen the reviews. It is a consensus. It sucks, and there's 3 reasons why. Here are the common themes across all the reviews. Number 1, that it's slow. Number 2, that it's limited. It doesn't do what you want it to do. And number 3, it's that it's inaccurate. In other words, it lies. And the reason I am confident in saying that it's a product that sucks and one that really cannot get better in the current state of things is because these are 3 problems that are inherent to the way that the product was designed, and not necessarily because of design decisions that they made along the way. It has to do with the technology, and it has to do with what their philosophy was in implementing it. Now, the slowness part is solvable. ChatGPT 4.0, the newest model that OpenAI has released, works on that problem exactly, right? It is a UX problem that it was trying to solve in regards to latency, the latency of the model response. The second thing that it does is it makes the voice more human, it makes it more emotive, but the important thing is that latency piece, because that was the complaint that people had about the AI Pin. Now, I've gotten to try the 4.0 model. I haven't gotten to try the voice model because I don't think that they've rolled it out yet. And so I still have a lot of questions, but I think it's instructive to look at the Humane AI Pin, how it works, and how the ChatGPT model works, and how 4.0 changes that equation just a little bit. Here is what ChatGPT is doing when you ask it a question using your voice. You start with a voice prompt. And you ask some question, you give it some statement, whatever. It doesn't necessarily matter. You take whatever you say and you feed it into their Whisper model. Now, Whisper is just a voice transcriber, and what it does is it turns your voice prompt into a text prompt. And after it's taking your text prompt, it then feeds it into the actual GPT system. Now, remember, GPT is just a large language model. It is taking that text prompt and turning it into a response. So what it does is it comes back, reads your prompt, sends it up, and says, here is your response. Great. Senses the voice model. It then sends it to a text to voice, and then it's out to the user. Okay, well then you have the user create the next response. So then, there you go. Then you have, you come over here and you say, here is the next voice prompt, and this process repeats. Now, eventually what happens is that as you get further and further down the chain, what you do is you start adding these responses and these text prompts together, and that is actually what you end up feeding into the GPT. And that is how you end up with a coherent conversation each time, is because it's mimicking a chat based off of its what is effectively a language calculator, okay? Most of this diagram is going to look very similar for something like the Humane AI Pin, especially since it's using ChatGPT underneath. But notice that there's going to be an extra little step here. Watch this. So when it comes to the AI Pin, here's what you do. You have a voice prompt. It transcribes it to a text prompt, sends it to GPT, but it doesn't stop there. GPT actually then is probably doing some type of semantic processing that they've set up. Maybe it's doing some sort of matching with some subsystems that they've created. Maybe it's kind of scanning the text and providing analysis to some other system that's going on. The point is that this then sends it to some semantic processor, which tries to understand the query. And remember, it's still only doing this using language and maybe some other simple tricks that have existed in computer science for a very long time, like search. And then it tries to perform an action. Maybe it's just the original response, maybe it's searching the web, maybe it's trying to figure out what's going on, maybe it's another subsystem and it's kind of bouncing around inside of their system until it ends up with a response, and you have a result from that action. That action is then sent back up to GPT to interpret, and then it provides you some response about what actually happened, what you asked for, etc. And of course, this is done using voice. Back all the way out to the user. Okay? Notice how much deeper and more complex this portion of the diagram is. You end up with this whole subsystem which can bounce around one direction or another. It takes time for each additional step along the way. And every time you hit any one of these blocks, you end up with more additional processing time, which is why it takes so much longer for this system to do it, because it's simply more complex and it's computationally expensive. Now, when we think about what 4.0 is doing, ChatGPT 4.0 is doing something slightly different. Instead of having this initial thing being 3 separate steps and then having this reason over those 3 separate steps, the claim is, and we haven't seen this yet, is that what's actually happening is you're taking this voice input and you're sending it directly to the GPT model, right? And then it sounds like maybe what's happening is then you're ending up with some response, and then it's sending it back out to a voice model again and out to the user. And then you kind of continue along this path. It takes this very long, complex portion and reduces it to this portion that initially was what ChatGPT was known for. Now, I'd say there's a lot of questions about that, but you can see how something like that alone could improve what Humane is doing, especially if they're using GPT under the covers. It takes care of a lot of these things. But there's something critical going on here. It may not let them directly hook into GPT at this point and do all of the processing that they want to do. And so Humane's AI Pin is kind of shoehorned into this system where it's kicking it around between GPT and another mishmash of technology and their own set of semantic processors, actions, results, apps, etc. And it's doing its best, but they're sort of stuck with the system that they've got. Now, you don't need to understand everything that's going on. My diagram is not perfect. It's not simplified. I didn't explain it very well. The point is that what Humane is doing is going deeper, more complex, trying to do more processing with something that was initially inherently slow. And even with those speedups that 4.0 brings, you still end up with a whole complex subsystem that is unpredictable, and that may still be slow because it requires so many of those hops between things, and because you cannot centralize those actions in the model because that model is someone else's, not Humane's. Now, when it comes to ChatGPT 4.0, it's not, the voice model's not out yet, but I've used the text model and it is faster, it's relatively good, right? And it does reduce the latency of at least one of those points of delay that was initially there, if not two of them. And so the point is that this problem is not inherent to AI, but was inherent to that AI technology as it stood back then, and it can be improved over time. But the real lesson for us when it comes to products is that latency is a crucial dimension to consider when building the user experience of a user-facing AI system. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got inaccuracy as an issue. For the Humane AI Pin, we saw this a lot. Many reviewers mentioned how they would ask it something, whether it be a combination of a visual prompt and a voice prompt, or whether it be a voice prompt alone, and that it would come back with sometimes helpful information, but more often than not, at least shaky information, if not outright wrong information altogether. So, for example, with this issue, it's not just the Humane AI Pin, ChatGPT can hallucinate. It's really actually kind of scary how easy it is to get ChatGPT to say anything or kind of effectively believe anything that you want it to. It's even scarier, though, to see how easy it is to miss something when you're doing something with the actual tool itself, and you might accidentally encourage ChatGPT to lie by asking a leading question, for example, or asking a question that's sort of like not in line with its black box nature. Now, hallucinations, they tend to happen because the model isn't reasoning the way that you and I do. It's not thinking through things in the same exact way. The model has a very limited view of the world, and that limited view is through language, and not even all language, but language that it has been trained on from the web, from particular sources, right? And its goal is not to reason through things, but to generate plausible sentences that tend to make, and this sort of tends to make the model effectively overheat, is what I call it, very easily. When you overheat it, that it kind of like goes off on its own. Now, this is not to say that it would be impossible for a language model to reach the point of having something that is effectively like reasoning. But with the current rate of progress, it's not clear that reasoning is something that is inherent to these models outright. And if it is, then so far it's extremely rudimentary, right? It is the nature of the model to be eager to please. And really what this is effectively is that an LLM, it BS's very well and in a plausible way for you to feel like it's giving you a back and forth and an effective response. So how would you solve this problem then? If it's not inherent to the LLM to do this reasoning, what would you do to fix it? I want you to think about that for a second. What I would do is that I would think about the main issue with LLMs, which is that they can't reason, but then I'd think about their strengths, that they're very good at summarizing or translating. So a good first instinct might be to lean into the thing that LLMs are good at and lean away from the thing that LLMs are bad at, and do some form of reasoning outside the LLM, and then use the LLM or AI to translate it back into something that's more like a chat response. So let's talk about what's happening in these large language models and the ChatGPT style things versus in search. In ChatGPT, we already know that we start with a text prompt. And that text prompt then gets set to the GPT subsystem. It then kind of processes that information and sends it back as a response. And then what you do is you take the next one and you combine all of these and you send it to the prompt. And then you send all of those things together back to the GPT. And then you continue this process forever and ever and ever. Now, the issue with this, the great thing about this, first of all, is that you can end up with this kind of sort of chain back and forth, which is a very clever way to do a UI for an AI LLM. The problem with it, though, is that these ChatGPT models are pre-baked and they have a particular view of the world based off of their training data, and not all of their training data is treated equally. In fact, that's kind of the point of these models, to focus on which parts of the language are the most important to go. They have no reasoning capability other than what additional word to add after, and their only job is to make plausible responses to what these text prompts are and their own responses, and this sort of chain of text and replies represent. That's all they're doing. There's no reasoning involved. So when it comes to the web, what's actually happening with Google is that they are not taking a text prompt from the beginning. What they're doing is they are starting with a search from a user, which is similar to a prompt, but slightly different. Often it's worded slightly different. And even if it isn't, you'll see how it differs here. That search is then sent to a search engine, which, by the way, is built on the back of the web, right? It crawls the web and indexes those pages. And that search engine ends up with search results. Okay, notice there's no LLM involved. Now, in the past, this would just be sent back up to the user in the form of links, right? Those search results. But what Google and Bing are doing now is they're inserting an LLM right in the middle there. They're saying this is an interesting piece of technology for the user interface, and then we can use that to translate it back to the user and show them the results. So this shows you the overview, and often it still shows the results just in case you want to still see them. Notice that this actually chain doesn't tend to continue, or at least it hasn't yet in the current crop of products. But the point is that notice where the prompt is going to first. It's going to this search engine first, right? Instead of going over to the LLM. And in fact, the LLM, all it's doing is a very simple job, which is translating these results into something that's visible by the user. So this is what they've bolted on to solve the issue of that hallucination. Because if you're grounding this LLM in the data, if you're using these results to build up the data necessary for the LLM to respond, then it's probably more likely that you're going to end up with something good in the end. But your answer here is only as good as the results that you build. Seems pretty good, relatively speaking. It maybe adds a little bit of flavor to the types of responses that we're getting and gives us ability to change something about the nature of reality with the world without having to change the baked-in nature of the model that we're using, right? And so this is what Bing did very early on, what Microsoft did using Bing and eventually Copilot, using ChatGPT in their partnership with OpenAI, right? They said, we have a search engine. It can augment and provide some form of reasoning outside of the model itself. And then what we can do is we can use the model to translate those responses into something that is more chat-like and more simple and intelligible for the end user. Recently, Google did the same thing, and now you know the story of Fuck Smith, so you know exactly how that goes. Google has suggested that people eat rocks in the last couple of weeks. It has suggested that people eat sticky cheese pizza with glue. And so the question is why? Why is this the case? Well, one issue is those hallucinations, right? Hallucinations happen in an LLM when you're asking it a question that it doesn't have a clear response to based off of the sort of average of the data that it's received in the past. That it's not, it wasn't a thing that it saw often in the model, and therefore it doesn't have a clear response to what you're trying to say. But the thing with search is that it's not hallucination. Remember, hallucination is kind of like the creative aspect of this AI stuff. And actually what's happening with the Google issue and with the Bing issue is that it is taking the data from the web, which is inherently a little unpredictable, and that the search is not actually good enough to sort the wheat from the chaff, if that makes sense, right? And so that bad information about the pizza coming up, well, guess what? That was a human Reddit commenter who was just using some satire, irony, any one of the sarcasm, any one of those things, and The search algorithm didn't recognize that, and the LLM algorithm didn't recognize that. And so it blindly spits it back out to the user in this authoritative way. And it doesn't look so hot. We've also seen this with literal satire websites. The Onion, a Seattle publication called The Needling, also had something like this. And so the lesson here is that an LLM isn't useful on its own, but it is a technology that, when paired with the right piece of reasoning software, or maybe more importantly, the right context provided, it can become very useful to translate those pieces of information into something that's easier to digest for a user. The last problem with the Humane AI Pin was limited functionality, right? This is where I would call the AI Pin's peer, the Rabbit R1, shows us sort of how the tech incumbents are going to shape the future of the tech industry and this technology being AI going forward. Limited functionality for these companies, for these products, is hard for some things enabled by AI. The main issue with the Humane AI Pin is that they wanted to be this standalone tech device, right? That they wanted to have their own platform that was separate from the phone platform because they saw phones as bad. I made a whole video about that. In order to do that, they have to create something from nothing. And platforms are just hard to create. They take a lot of effort, a lot of time, and guess what? iOS has, what are we up to now? 18 iterations practically on top of them. Not to mention Google and the underlying technology being from the next days. We're talking decades of time on top of these companies, effectively. So you end up with these bad products, right? And you end up with an R1 that needs something that can do stuff. And so the R1 tried to iterate on top of what was going on in the LLM space and fix the problem of the platform model and almost do what Google did for the web, but for web apps and just apps in general. And they called it their large action model, a LAM. Now, the LAM was a way, bottom line, around the restrictions of the smartphone app and the walled garden and the platforms that both Google and Apple maintain. It solved the problem. These things need to be useful. These products need to be useful. And this was a big complaint about the AI Pin, is that it really wasn't that useful. You couldn't set a timer, was the joke, right? So how would you solve this problem? If before we found a way to solve it and we ended up with sort of a half-baked but solution that sort of kind of works, is there a better solution for this large action model, for this set of actions that, this problem with the walled gardens that is arguably a harder problem to solve? Well, the LAM was the answer to that, right? It's deceptively simple. That instead of forcing developers to create apps for their platform, that Rabbit basically wanted you to train an AI to learn how to use pre-existing apps that were out there on the web or out there on an Android system. But that's easier said than done.
But in theory, you'll someday be able to teach the R1 to use any app for you.
It all kind of felt like the future. It's why people ordered $20 million worth of these little boxes.
But there's theory and there's reality. I have never once, for instance, successfully managed to order DoorDash.
But a group investigation has revealed that Rabbit is not actually using a new foundational AI model at all. It's actually ChatGPT with some hard-coded scripts.
A lot of these tech companies are developing tech kind of backwards. Like, they're delivering such unfinished products that it actually makes them nearly impossible to review.
So yeah, it seems like the LAM, first of all, was a scam. It doesn't mean that it's not going to go anywhere, or that there's not just a stopgap between now and there, but it doesn't seem like the technology really exists. And so it's a harder problem to solve than we gave it credit, that many people gave it credit for at the beginning. And the lesson here, just overall, is that a virtual assistant needs to do more than just retrieve information. It needs to be able to take action on your behalf. And those who are positioned to make these LLMs and AI systems take action on your behalf in a fluid and straightforward and responsive way, they are best positioned to have success in integrating this technology into the future. And so finally, this brings us back to the Humane AI Pin, which effectively is the paragon of all of the problems with the current crop of AI products out there. It was slow, it was inaccurate, and it couldn't do much. And each of those problems spoke to a different problem with the tech industry, with these companies' design philosophies, with the hype around AI and what it can possibly do. And importantly, our understanding of this technology and who is positioned to actually use it. I'd say the AI hype is, I don't know if it's dying down, it is changing, that's for sure. And in a lot of ways, that hype was warranted. It is a profound technology to be able to manipulate, have computers be able to manipulate language this effectively. We've been working for decades trying to get computers to do this. But when you look at these products and you wonder why they're so bad, I wouldn't get too excited about the technology, but I wouldn't also fall down on, I wouldn't count it out too much either. I think that one of the best examples of this is the Copilot Plus PCs that Microsoft has put out, and I'm definitely going to make a video about that soon. And very, very soon, in less than a week, we'll see what Apple has done at WWDC. Importantly, both of those products are made by platform vendors that have been around for a very long time and have integrated new technologies into their operating systems and into their broader ecosystems of technology in a way that speaks to their business interests and their expertise, rather than trying to build everything on the back of this one shaky horse that is just getting out of the stable. And I have so many feelings about this, not least of which is that, maybe the time of platform disruption is effectively over. I think that the one remaining piece of this question is what OpenAI becomes in the midst of all of this, especially as they power both Microsoft's and presumably Apple's platforms. But it doesn't seem very likely that a scrappy upstart is going to start from nothing and be able to build everything needed in order to satisfy the users of very sophisticated computers that we carry around in our pockets every single day. I mean, even Google failed to do this to some extent with their AI overviews, and I think it remains to be seen whether they can do what it takes in order to, incorporate this technology in a way that doesn't threaten their core business, or in a way that threatens their core business and allows them to pivot into something new. Anyway, thanks for watching. I think that since the last time we did this, I've gotten over 1,000 subscribers, and I appreciate you all watching. It means a lot for the future of this channel, and I will definitely make a video about that soon too. Please give me your thoughts in the comments. I know I rarely ask for this directly, but I have loved the conversations that I've been having in the comments about AI, and so I hope to see you in there, and we'll be talking soon.